There are places in this world where the lights don't reach. Stretches of track that slice through forgotten woods, tunnels bored into the bedrock of ancient mountains, switching yards that operate in the dead hours between midnight and dawn. These are the domains of the railroad worker. Theirs is a world of diesel and steel, of schedules and logistics, of a solitude that is both profound and, at times, profoundly unsettling. Because when you are alone on 100 tons of rolling momentum, or walking a deserted line under a starless sky, the rules of the everyday world seem to dissolve. The familiar sounds, the rumble of an engine, the call of a dispatcher, can become distorted. And sometimes, they aren't distortions at all. Sometimes, they are signals, warnings, or invitations. What waits on the tracks ahead? What walks the lines when no human eye is meant to see? And what happens when the people who keep this continent moving encounter things that should not move at all? This is Verified Nightmare, where every nightmare is real, and every story is verified. Tonight, we document 11 cases from the darkest edges of the railroading world. Each account is drawn from official incident reports, union logs, declassified FRA investigations, and first-hand testimony from the engineers, brakemen, and maintenance of way workers who experienced them. These are not campfire tales. They are entries in a ledger of the inexplicable, written in the cold language of bureaucracy and the haunted words of those who were there. We begin with a stretch of track in the Pacific Northwest, a routine maintenance call, and a foreman who would learn that some sections of rail are not meant to be repaired. This is Story 1, the Bellingham Bend. But first, if you value the line between fact and fear, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell. What you're about to hear comes from the people who have seen what waits in the dark between destinations. Staying informed isn't just about curiosity, it might be about survival. The Bellingham Bend. Michael Thorne was a 54-year-old foreman for the Northern Pacific Railroad, a man whose life was ruled by precision. He wore a perfectly calibrated Casio Forester watch, kept his tool crib inventory down to the last spike, and believed every problem on the rails had a logical, mechanical solution. His current assignment was a 3-mile section of track known as the Bellingham Bend, a gentle curve through a dense stretch of old-growth forest in Washington state. According to a Federal Railroad Administration track geometry car report, flagged for minor alignment issues and slight gauge widening. A simple weekend job for his crew of 4. They arrived at dawn on a Saturday, the forest shrouded in a cool, dense fog that muffled the sounds of their trucks. The inciting incident was not a sound, but a silence. As Michael stepped out to survey the work zone, he noted the complete absence of birdsong. His crewman, a young guy named Luis, pointed it out too. "Creepy quiet, Mike." Michael dismissed it. Early hour, thick fog. They unloaded their gear: the spike mauls, the claw bars, the massive hydraulic jack for lifting track. The first task was to walk the section and mark the specific TIs for replacement. It was Luis again who found it. A single, adult-sized work boot, placed neatly on the railhead, laces tied, pointing east. It was worn but not rotten, damp with dew. No name, no obvious markings. "Some hobo's junk," Michael said, tossing it into the weeds with a gloved hand. He logged the oddity in his initial site report as debris on right-of-way, a standard notation. The boot, according to his later testimony, was a Red Wing style, size 11. The work began. The familiar clang of steel and the grunts of labor were the only sounds in the silent wood. By midday, the fog had burned off, revealing a surprisingly dark canopy that blocked most of the sun. It was then the small anomalies began. Michael's perfectly calibrated watch began to lose time, then gain it. He'd check it against the atomic clock on his work radio, and it would be 5 minutes slow. An hour later, it would be 7 minutes fast. He assumed battery failure, rare annoyance. Then, the tool started migrating. Luis's favorite clawbar, left leaning against a switch tie, was found 50 yards down the track, standing upright as if planted. The heavy jack, which took 2 men to move, was discovered shifted 3 feet from its placement, its base sitting in fresh, damp earth as if it had been dragged. Michael's crew grew uneasy. He insisted it was pranksters, maybe kids from a nearby access road. The buildup accelerated as the afternoon light began to fail. The radio, tuned to the company channel, began to pick up faint, distorted chatter. Not the clear voice of the dispatcher in Seattle, but a low, wet-sounding murmur. Luis swore he heard his name in the static. Then, the sound of footsteps on ballast, crunching in a slow, steady rhythm parallel to their work, just inside the tree line. Every time they shined a light, it stopped. They saw nothing. Michael, a rational man, ordered them to pair up. He called dispatch to report possible trespassers. The dispatcher's response, recorded in the call log, was clear. "We have no other personnel in your zone, Foreman Thorne, and we've had no reports of unauthorized access." As dusk settled, the final tool went missing, Michael's own surveyor's level, a $3,000 piece of equipment. Furious now, he stomped into the trees where he'd last seen it, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. He didn't find the level. He found the boot, the same Red Wing, size 11. But now, it was not alone. It was part of a line, dozens of boots, shoes, and work sneakers, all placed neatly in a row, toes pointed toward the track, stretching back into the deepening darkness of the forest. Each pair was spaced exactly 3 feet apart. They were of different styles, different eras, some modern leather, one a rotting leather high top that looked a century old. In the center of the line sat his surveyor's level, perfectly balanced on a moss-covered stump. Michael froze. His blood, he later told investigators, turned to ice. The rational world of spikes and schedules shattered. This was a display, a collection. He backed away slowly, then ran to his crew. "We're leaving. Now, leave the gear." They didn't argue. As they threw their personal items into the truck, the crunching footsteps returned, this time not parallel, but converging from multiple points in the woods. Something heavy was moving through the underbrush, snapping branches. Luis, white as a sheet, pointed his flashlight toward the track they had just been repairing. There, standing in the middle of the rails, was the outline of a man. Backlit by the last bloody dregs of sunset, it was impossibly tall and thin, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. It held something long and metallic in one hand, a tool, a bar, a weapon. It made no sound. The reveal was not a single moment, but a cascading understanding that hit Michael in the truck, speeding down the service road. The misplaced tools weren't pranks. They were lures. The lost boots and shoes, they weren't discarded. They were trophies. The thing on the tracks wasn't a trespasser. It was a resident. He had brought his crew to fix a stretch of line that something else considered its own private hunting ground. The official FRA report, filed after Michael's frantic debriefing, codes the incident as a Code 22, harassment or intimidation by persons unknown. It notes the abandoned equipment, the foreman's agitated state, and the unverified visual report of an individual on the tracks. No formal investigation was launched due to lack of material evidence. The aftermath is where the verification solidifies. Michael requested and was granted an immediate transfer to a desk job. Luis quit the industry altogether, but the chilling and resolved detail comes from a subsequent maintenance crew, sent 2 weeks later to finish the job under heavy security. Their report states that upon arrival, they found all of Michael's abandoned tools, the jack, the bars, the mauls neatly stacked in a pyramid in the center of the Bellingham Bend, and lining the rails, for the entire 3-mile section, was a continuous, unbroken line of stones, each about the size of a fist, as if marking a boundary or a warning. The line was cleared, the job completed, but to this day, veteran workers on that division refuse solo assignments on the Bend, especially after dark. They have a name for what they believe resides there, passed down in hushed tones in union halls: the section foreman, the one who collects crews that stray onto his piece of the line. The deadhead commute. Anya Petrova was a 38-year-old locomotive engineer for a major Class I railroad, a woman who found a deep, meditative peace in the rhythm of the night shift. Her run was the deadhead, a freight route through the sprawling, empty deserts of Nevada, carrying auto parts from a factory to a distribution hub. It was a straight shot, 6 hours of darkness, a well-compensated solitude she preferred. Her cab was her sanctuary. The hum of the 4400 horsepower engine, the warm glow of the instrument panel, the star-flecked blackness of the desert sky through her windshield. She was meticulous, her logbook pristine, her awareness of the signals and detectors along the route absolute. On the night of October 17th, according to the subsequent operational incident review, everything was normal until milepost 227. The inciting incident was a signal anomaly. The automatic block signal system, which governs train spacing, showed a clear green for her segment. But as she approached the distant signal for block 227B, she saw it was dark. No red, yellow, or green, just a dead, black eye. She radioed the dispatcher in Reno. "Reno, this is Engineer Petrova on train Q442. I've got a dark signal at 227B. The dispatcher's voice, logged in the audio recording, was calm. "Copy, Q442. We show it functioning on our end. Must be a local bulb failure. You are clear through that block. Proceed with caution." Anya acknowledged, a slight knot of unease in her stomach. A dark signal wasn't unheard of, but it was rare. She throttled down slightly, her eyes scanning the tracks ahead, lit by the train's twin headlights. The buildup began a few miles later. The defect detector, a trackside unit that scans passing trains for overheating bearings or dragging equipment, usually announced itself with a robotic voice over the radio. "Detector, milepost 231. No defects. Axle count, 128. Speed, 52 miles per hour. This time, as she passed it, the radio in her cab crackled. Instead of the robotic voice, there was a burst of static, and then a low, whispery human voice, barely audible. It said, "Stop." The word was drawn out, mangled by interference. Anya stiffened. She radioed Reno again. "Reno, Q442. I just got some weird interference on the detector freq at 231. Sounded like voice comes." The dispatcher responded, "We have no other traffic on that frequency, Q442. Probably scanner bleed over from a trucker. Continue your run." She tried to dismiss it, but the cab, once a sanctuary, now felt exposed. The desert outside felt less empty, more observant. At milepost 245, she saw a figure, just off the right-of-way, maybe 50 yards into the scrub. A person was standing beside a small, flickering fire. As her train roared past, the figure turned. In the strobing light from her cab windows, Anya saw it was a man in what looked like old-fashioned railroad coveralls. He wasn't waving for help. He was just staring, his face a pale oval, his arm raised, not in greeting, but pointing down the track ahead of her. The image lasted only a second before it was swallowed by the darkness behind her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Things escalated rapidly. Her speedometer began to fluctuate, though her throttle setting was constant. The cab lights dimmed momentarily, then brightened. Then, the radio came to life on its own. Not the dispatcher. A chorus of whispers, overlapping, desperate. She caught fragments. "Get off. Not your train. He's in the consist." The word consist, the list of cars in her train, was a professional term. This wasn't random radio bleed. She grabbed the mic, her voice tight. "Who is on this frequency? Identify yourselves." The whispers ceased. Dead air. Then, one clear, mournful voice, a man's voice, weary and final. "Check your manifest, engineer. Check your damn manifest." Terrified, she pulled the physical manifest from her clipboard. It listed her 128 cars of auto parts, all sealed boxcars. But as she scanned it, her blood ran cold. At the very bottom, handwritten in blue ink in a script that wasn't hers or the yard clerk's, was an additional line. "Car 129 HC special handling, do not open. HC, hopper car." She had no hopper cars. She was pulling all boxcars. A sickening dread filled her. The reveal crashed over her. Something was on her train. Something that wasn't on the official list. Something that had manipulated her instruments, hijacked her radio, and was now, according to that whisper, in the consist. She looked back through the small window into the long, snaking darkness of her train. The headlights of a following unit would have been visible. There was only blackness, but between the rhythmic clacks of her own wheels, she could now hear it a different, slower, heavier clanking, coming from far back in the train. The sound of a loose coupling, or something moving between the cars. She screamed for the dispatcher, declaring an emergency. She requested permission to stop the train immediately in the middle of the desert. The dispatcher, now alarmed by her tone, authorized it. Anya initiated the emergency brake application, the screech of Sanders and locking wheels deafening. The mile-long train groaned and shuddered to a halt, somewhere in the absolute void between towns. The aftermath is documented in the official report. Security personnel met her train at the next crew change point. They walked the entire length. Car 128 was the last car. There was no car 129, no hopper car, no physical evidence of tampering. The handwritten line on her manifest was deemed a prank, though no source was found. Anya was placed on administrative leave for 2 weeks for emotional distress, but the verification comes from the defect detector logs. The detector at milepost 231, which had whispered to her, did record an anomaly that night. Its thermal scan showed a pronounced, localized heat signature on the roof of car 127, the second to last car, a signature inconsistent with the sealed auto parts boxcar. It was the heat signature of a living body, or a concentrated energy source, sitting motionless on top of the train. Furthermore, a review of radio logs showed a faint, unidentifiable carrier wave on the dedicated detector frequency at the exact time of her pass, a transmission with no authorized source. Anya Petrova never ran the deadhead again. She transferred to a busy daytime commuter route, where the presence of passengers was a comfort. But to this day, she refuses to look at a physical manifest after dark. She relies solely on the digital version in her console, and veteran engineers on the Nevada desert run know the story. They have a protocol unofficially when they get a dark signal near milepost 227. They call it the invitation. They don't just proceed with caution. They double-check their consist, and they make sure, very sure, that they are alone in the cab. Because sometimes, the deadhead commute isn't just about an empty train. It's about what might be hitching a ride. The Tunnel 13 watchman. Leo Gutierrez was a 62-year-old bridge and tunnel inspector for a regional railway in the Appalachian region. A veteran of 37 years, he knew every inch of his territory, from the rusting trestles over wooded gorges to the damp, echoing tunnels built in the age of steam. His hearing was shot from a lifetime of diesel roar, compensated for by an almost supernatural attention to visual detail, a hairline crack in concrete, the slightest warp in a rail, the way water seeped in a new pattern on stone. Tunnel 13, a 1.7-mile bore through the spine of Black Ridge, was his least favorite assignment. It was old, prone to minor rockfalls, and its lighting was perpetually half-failed, casting long, shifting shadows. But according to the structural integrity report filed the previous quarter, it was sound, just unpleasant. Leo's routine was clockwork. Park his high rail inspection truck at the south portal, don his hard hat and vest, and walk the tunnel's service catwalk, noting any changes with a digital camera and a voice recorder. The inciting incident was a photograph. On a Tuesday morning inspection, Leo was documenting a persistent damp patch on the north wall. About halfway through, he snapped 3 pictures. Back in his truck, reviewing them on his laptop, he froze. In the third picture, in the background just at the edge of the flash's reach, was a figure. It stood on the catwalk maybe 100 yards behind where he had been, shrouded in the gloom, but unmistakably human in shape. It wore what looked like a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, an anachronism that sent a chill down Leo's spine. The figure was turned toward him, its face a featureless smudge. He had heard no footsteps, seen no one else on his walk-in. He checked the tunnel's access logs. No other personnel were scheduled. He wrote it off as a trick of light and shadow, a bizarre pareidolia from water stains and old timber. He noted it in his log as visual anomaly, likely perceptual, but saved the photo. The buildup began the following week. The tunnel's lighting, always temperamental, began to fail in a new pattern. Not random outages, but a sequential dimming. As Leo would walk, the lights behind him would click off, one by one, as if following his progress, plunging the section he just traversed into darkness. The lights ahead would remain on. It felt less like an electrical fault and more like guidance or hurting. Then came the smells. In the dead center of the tunnel, far from any ventilation shaft, he would catch the distinct, acrid odor of coal smoke and hot oil, the scent of a steam locomotive, impossible in the diesel age. It would come in a wave, then vanish. His voice recorder, used to note cracks and seepage, began to pick up faint audio behind his own voice, the distant, rhythmic sound of a pickaxe striking rock, and occasionally, a low, muttered conversation in what sounded like Italian. Tunnel 13 was built in 1903 by immigrant labor, largely Italian. Leo knew the history. He had the recordings analyzed by a tech-savvy nephew. The background noises were confirmed as non-environmental, clear strikes of metal on stone. There were no active mining operations anywhere near Black Ridge. Then, he found the markings. While inspecting a ventilation grate, his flashlight beam caught a series of scratches on the tunnel wall at ankle height, near the base of the catwalk. They were tallies, hundreds of them, grouped in fives, etched into the stone with the sharp tool. They were old, but not ancient. The stone dust in the grooves was fresh, and they were recent additions. He photographed them. The next week, there were more. It was a count, but a count of what? The reveal happened on a day when Leo decided to deviate from his routine. Instead of walking the catwalk, he drove his high rail truck slowly through the tunnel, its amber warning lights slicing through the gloom. He stopped near the center, the point of the strongest coal smoke smell. He stepped out, not onto the catwalk, but onto the ballast between the tracks, something he rarely did due to safety protocols. He shone his light at the wall where the tallies were. And there, partially obscured by a support beam, he saw it. A name, carved deep and with care, G. Moretti, and below it, not a tally, but a date, November 12, 1903. Leo's blood went cold. He knew that date. It was in the old company archives, a cave-in during construction section that had trapped and killed 3 workers. Their bodies, according to the brittle, typed report he'd once read, were never recovered. The tunnel was sealed around them, and construction rerouted. He was standing at the tomb. At that moment, the sequential light failure occurred in reverse. The lights ahead of him, toward the north portal, began to click off, one after another, marching toward him. The lights behind him were already dark. He was being plunged into a shrinking pool of light, and in the newly created darkness ahead, he saw a single, steady light. Not the cold white of an LED work lamp, but the warm, swaying glow of an oil lantern. It hung in midair, illuminating the lower half of a figure in a worn leather apron and the handle of a pickaxe planted on the ground. The figure raised its free hand, not in menace, but with a single finger pointing, insistently, down at the tracks at Leo's feet. Leo looked down. His truck's wheels were parked squarely over a section of newer-looking concrete, a repair patch in the tunnel floor. A patch he'd never thought to question. A patch that, according to the original blueprints he suddenly remembered, should not have been there. This was the burial site. The watchman wasn't threatening him. It was showing him. It was insisting on being counted. The aftermath is verified by the company's engineering response. Leo filed an emergency report stating he had found potential historical human remains and a previously undocumented structural anomaly. A forensic archaeology team was brought in. Under that concrete patch, they discovered the partially mummified remains of 2 individuals, along with personal effects identifying one as Giovanni Moretti. The third body was never found. The tunnel was closed for a month. Leo was commended for his diligence, but the chilling, unresolved detail is in the updated inspection logs. After the remains were removed and the tunnel ray opened, the sequential light failure stopped. The smells vanished, but the tallies continue. Every Monday morning, when the first inspector walks the catwalk, fresh groups of 5 scratches are found etched into a specific granite slab near the south portal, a slab that was cleaned the Friday before. No cameras have caught it. No motion sensors trigger. The marks just appear. The official stance is vandalism, but no one has been caught, and no tool marks match any contemporary instrument. The workers have their own explanation. They say the watchman is still on duty, and he's still counting the days. But now, they wonder, is he counting the days since his death? Or is he counting down to something else? The Silverton Line's extra passenger. Elias Crane was a 28-year-old conductor on the historic Silverton Narrow Gauge, a seasonal tourist railroad winding through the breathtaking, treacherous San Juan Mountains of Colorado. His job was part historian, part shepherd, ensuring the passengers on the vintage steam train had a safe and memorable journey through the mountain passes. He knew every curve, every trestle, every point of interest. He narrated over the PA system. The run was popular, always sold out. On the final trip of the season, October 31st, the train was packed with Halloween enthusiasts, hoping for a ghostly experience. Elias, a pragmatist, humored them. His manifest, confirmed by the ticket office in Durango, listed 187 paid passengers. He did his standard head count as they boarded, coming up with the same number. The digital scanner at the steps tallied 187 unique ticket barcodes. Everything was in order. The inciting incident was a discrepancy in the CAF car. The train had a small concession run by a college student named Chloe. An hour into the journey, as they climbed into the high, remote reaches of the Animas River Gorge, she radioed Elias, her voice puzzled. "Conductor, I'm 2 hot chocolates short on my count. I've poured 189 since departure. My starting stock was for 187 plus crew. You guys want some cocoa?" Elias smiled, thinking she'd miscounted. He did a quick verbal check with the engineer and the other brakeman. None had taken a drink. He radioed back. "Must be a counting error, Chloe, but I'll take one." He thought little of it. The mountains were draped in low, swift-moving clouds, and a cold drizzle had begun. The buildup was subtle, a series of small, administrative glitches that frayed Elias's sense of control. The onboard Wi-Fi spotty at the best of times kept dropping, but the router logs later showed a constant, low-level data drain from a device with an unrecognized MAC address. Then, the PA system crackled once, in the middle of his narration about the 1882 mining disaster, with a burst of old-timey piano music, faint and tinny, before cutting off. He assumed it was interference. The real unease began with the head counts. As part of his duties, Elias would walk the 5 cars periodically, checking tickets and ensuring safety. On his second walk, he counted 188 passengers. He stopped, retraced his steps through the rocking cars. 188. He checked the scanner log. It still showed 187 scans. He told himself he must have double-counted a child, or missed someone in a bathroom. On his third walk, he made a mark on his clipboard for each passenger. He ended with 189. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. The train was moving. No one could get on or off. He quietly radioed the brakeman in the rear car to do his own count. The brakeman's voice came back, confused. "I'm getting 190, Eli. What's going on?" They had a non-existent passenger, or more than one. Elias decided to review the security camera footage from the boarding platform, accessible on a tablet. The footage clearly showed 187 people boarding, but as he watched the last few passengers, he saw something that made him replay the segment twice. A woman in a long, gray, old-fashioned dress and a wide hat, her face obscured, stepped onto the steps of car 3, but the scanner post, clearly in frame, did not flash green. And the passenger behind her, a man in a modern jacket, immediately after, did trigger the scan. The woman in gray had not been scanned. She had not been tallied. The reveal came not from a sighting, but from a photograph. A passenger, a jovial man in a Halloween sweater, approached Elias. "Hey, conductor, got a spooky one for you." He showed Elias a photo on his phone. He'd been taking a selfie with his wife in their plush seats, the beautiful, mist-shrouded gorge visible through the window behind them. In the window's reflection, clear as day, sat a third person in their row. A woman in a gray dress and hat, her head turned away, looking out the window. She was seated between the couple and the aisle. The man laughed. "Must be a reflection from across the aisle, right?" But Elias knew the seating layout. There was no one across the aisle in a gray dress. He felt the air leave his lungs. The extra passenger was not a stowaway. She was something else entirely, and she was interacting with the environment, consuming resources, casting reflections. He made an announcement, his voice steady but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, as a safety precaution, we are going to conduct a brief ticket rate check. Please have your tickets ready." It was a pretext. He and the brakeman moved from car to car, this time not just counting, but looking at every face. In car 3, he saw her. She was in the last row, seat 24B, by the window, exactly where the photograph suggested. She was gazing out at the passing cliffs, her profile pale and indistinct under the hat. Her dress was not just old-fashioned, it was period, from the late 1800s, finely detailed, but faded, as if seen through a fine gauze. Elias approached, his heart hammering. "Ticket, ma'am." She slowly turned her head. Her face was not skeletal or monstrous, but it was blurred, like a photograph with a slow shutter speed. She smiled faintly, a sad, distant smile, and said nothing. She simply held out her hand, and it was not a ticket, but a small, tarnished silver token, stamped with the logo of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad, a company that hadn't operated this line in over a century. The aftermath is contained in the Silverton Line's end-of-season report. Elias reported a passenger in possession of non-valid historical travel media. The train completed its journey. Security met the train at Silverton. Elias pointed them to seat 24B. It was empty. The silver token was on the seat cushion, cold to the touch. No one saw the woman in gray disembark. Passenger headcounts upon leaving the train confirmed 187 people. The token was logged into Lost and Found. The verification is multifaceted. The CAF car's inventory was off by exactly 2 hot chocolates, corroborating Chloe's initial count. The router logs showed the unknown device was active only for the duration of the trip, from departure to arrival. The photograph from the passenger was time-stamped and geodaged, proving it was taken on the train. Most compellingly, a search of historical archives turned up a record of a woman named Eleanor Vance, who purchased a ticket on the Silverton Line in October of 1898 to visit her fiancé, a miner. The train was caught in a sudden, early blizzard. A minor avalanche derailed the rear car, killing 1 passenger. Eleanor Vance. She was buried in a cemetery in Silverton. Her listed personal effects included a silver D and argue goodwill token. The token in Lost and Found was an exact match for ones minted in 1897. Elias still works the line, but every Halloween season, he does the head counts himself, and he always adds 1 to the final number before filing the manifest. He leaves an empty seat in car 3, 24B, and sometimes, on the final, misty run of the year, the CAF car still comes up 2 drinks short. Chloe just pours them now and leaves them on the service counter. By the end of the trip, the cups are always empty and cold to the touch. The Kansas City Switchman Skeleton Crew. Marcus Boyd was a 45-year-old switchman and yardmaster at the massive Argentine Yard in Kansas City, a sprawling, labyrinthine network of tracks where freight trains from across the continent were broken down and reassembled. His world was one of controlled chaos. The hiss of air brakes, the metallic crash of couplers engaging, the constant, tinny chatter of the radio. He worked the owl shift, PM to EM, when the yard was a cathedral of sodium vapor lights and moving shadows. Marcus was a creature of habit and procedure, believing the rulebook was the only thing separating order from catastrophic disaster in the maze of steel. The incident began on a night so still and humid the air felt like wet wool, documented in the yard's operational log as having no adverse weather conditions. The inciting incident was a phantom call on the radio. Marcus was orchestrating the movement of a string of grain hoppers from track 14 to the eastbound departure line. Over his headset, clear as a bell, he heard his call sign. "Yardmaster Boyd, come in." It was a voice he didn't recognize, thin, reedy, with a strange, almost melodic flatness to its tone. He responded, "Go ahead, identify." The voice replied, "We're ready for the consist on the rip track." Need your authorization to proceed." The hair on Marcus's neck stood up. The RIP track was the repair line, and it was empty and dark that night. All scheduled heavy maintenance had been completed by the evening crew. He radioed the night foreman. "Hey, Steve, you got guys on the RIP track?" Steve's sleepy voice came back. "Negative, Marcus. It's locked down." "Why?" Marcus didn't answer. He scanned the yard from his glass-walled tower. The RIP track was a pool of blackness at the far southern edge, beyond the reach of the main light banks. He saw nothing. He wrote it off as a crossed signal. Maybe a new hire on a different channel playing a prank. The buildup was a systematic corruption of his information. First, the hump list, the computer-generated manifests that told him which cars to push over the hump to be sorted, began to show errors. Cars that were listed as empty would, when he checked their physical tags, be loaded. Car numbers would be transposed. It was like the system was lagging, showing him data from an hour ago. Then, the remote-controlled switches, operated from his console, began to behave erratically. He would line a switch for track 22, and the status light would blink, then show it lined for track 24. He'd have to throw it twice, sometimes 3 times. The maintenance log showed no faults. Then came the sounds from the ground. Switchmen working below would radio up, asking, "Hey, Marcus, you got another crew working the west ladder? I keep hearing knuckles closing over there." He didn't. The audio pickups around the yard began picking up the distinct, clanging footfalls of someone walking on ballast and vacant aisles, and the low, murmuring sound of conversation where there was no one to converse. The worst was the shadow train. One night, around AM, Marcus watched a string of about 20 dark boxcars, with no running lights, being slowly pushed by a silent, unlit switch engine from a storage track toward the main classification yard. It moved with purpose. He radioed the engine crew immediately. "Engine 559, are you moving that string out of track 40? The confused reply was instant. "Yardmaster, 559 is shut down for fueling at the roundhouse." "I'm not even in the seat." Marcus stared. The train kept moving, sliding silently into the maze of tracks and disappearing behind a string of tankers. He called security for a ground check. They found nothing. No engine, no cars, no trace. But the switches it had to have passed through were thrown, manually, from their local control panels. The reveal came when Marcus, determined to regain control, decided to do a physical walk of the most problematic section, the old western ladder, a set of tracks dating back to the yard's founding. He took a high-powered flashlight and his radio. The moment he stepped off the paved path onto the ballast, the yard felt different. The constant background noise of distant trains and city hum faded, replaced by a thick, insulating silence. His flashlight beam seemed weaker, and then he saw them. Figures, dozens of them, standing in the spaces between idle freight cars. They were silhouettes, more suggestions of shape than substance, but he could make out postures, some leaning on brake wheels, others carrying long, lantern-like objects, others simply standing at attention as if waiting for orders. They didn't move toward him, they just watched. He realized, with a dawning, existential horror, that they weren't trespassers. Their clothing was wrong, baggier, older. One wore a classic railroad cap. These were not living men. He fumbled for his radio. It emitted only a loud, blank static. As he backed away, his light swept across the side of a rusting boxcar. Painted on it in fresh, dripping white paint that gleamed in the beam were a series of markings, reporting marks, car numbers, and destinations. But they were for railroads that had been defunct for half a century: the Rock Island Line, the Missouri Pacific, the Wabash. This was their manifest. This was their yard. He was the intruder on the owl shift. The skeleton crew was just doing its job, eternally sorting a train that never arrived, following procedures from a rulebook written in a different century. The phantom radio calls, the switch tracks, the shadow train, it was all just the normal operation of a layer of reality that existed superimposed upon his own. The aftermath is detailed in a confidential report filed with the Railroad's Union Safety Committee. Marcus Boyd took a sudden and permanent medical leave for acute stress syndrome. The official yard logs note persistent equipment glitches during that period. later attributed to a scheduled firmware update that caused temporary parity errors. But the verification comes from the other night shift workers. To this day, they abide by unwritten rules. You never acknowledge a voice on the radio that doesn't first identify itself with the modern call sign. You never question a switch that seems to throw itself. You just realign it and move on. And you never, ever take a shortcut through the Western Ladder after midnight. Most chillingly, the security cameras that sweep that sector sometimes capture fleeting, thermal images of human-shaped cold spots moving between the cars, against the warm backdrop of machinery and pavement. They are filed under environmental anomalies. The yard's oldest foreman, due to retire next year, put it simply, the yard never sleeps, but sometimes, the crew that's working, they ain't drawing breath. They're just making sure the trains keep rolling, forever. The ghost in the signaling cabinet. Dr. Arise Thorne, no relation to the foreman from the Bellingham Bend, was a 39-year-old senior systems engineer for a multinational rail technology firm. Her expertise was in solid-state interlocking systems, the computerized brains that control signals and switches, replacing old mechanical relays. She was a problem solver, believer in code, logic gates, and diagnostic software. Her current assignment was a perplexing outage on a critical main line in upstate New York. A series of signaling cabinets, designated Seek 7 through Seek 10 along a 10-mile stretch, were experiencing repeated, inexplicable reboots. This caused signals to default to red, halting all traffic. Physical inspections found no faults. Her company sent her to perform a deep firmware audit. Arise arrived, her toolkit full of logic analyzers and diagnostic laptops, expecting corrupted code or a hardware bug. The inciting incident was in the logs. Arise set up her equipment at the Seek 8 cabinet, a beige metal box standing alone in a field of wild grass beside the tracks. She pulled the event log from the past 72 hours. The system had rebooted 14 times. Each time, the shutdown was graceful, not a power failure, but a commanded system halt, followed by a restart. The source of the command was listed internally as local user interface, but there was no local interface at the cabinet. It was all controlled from the central dispatching office miles away. It was as if someone, or something, was physically at the cabinet, pressing the reset button. Yet the security seal on the door was intact. She noted the timestamps. Every reboot occurred at 3:18 a.m. precisely. That was not random. That was a pattern. That was intent. The buildup began as she dug deeper. She decided to stay on site that night, monitoring the system in real time from her van parked a discreet distance away. She wired in a secondary power monitor and a high-gain microphone to pick up any sounds from the cabinet. The night was cold and clear. At 3:17 a.m., her laptop screen showed system activity spiking. The CPU usage climbed to 100%, not from any external command, but from an internal process with an unfamiliar alphanumeric tag. Proc archive scan. At 3:18 a.m. exactly, the system issued its own halt command. Through her headphones, from the microphone inside the cabinet, she heard it. Not the hum of electronics, but a sharp, mechanical click. Then a sound like the slow, deliberate turning of a heavy rotary switch, a kind of sound no solid-state system should be capable of making. Then another click, and the system rebooted. It was mimicking the behavior of the old electromechanical relay it had replaced a decade prior. The next day, Arise researched the history of that exact location. County land records and old railway schematics revealed that Seek 8 stood on the footprint of a former manually operated signal box, designated Tower 7, demolished in 1998. The tower operator had one job: to set the signals for a dangerous, blind junction that once existed there. Her blood ran cold when she found the microfiche of an accident report dated November 4, 1995. A head-on collision between a freight and a maintenance vehicle. Cause: signal irregularity. The tower operator, a man named Walter Brennan, had claimed the levers in his tower moved on their own that night, displaying a clear signal when he had set them for danger. He was blamed for negligence. He took his own life 6 months later. Aris now understood she wasn't debugging a machine. She was communicating with a memory, a traumatic, ingrained memory. That night, she set up a different experiment. She wrote a simple text file and loaded it onto the cabinet's auxiliary storage drive. A single line, "What is your name?" She configured the system to monitor the file for changes. At 3:18 a.m., the system rebooted as usual. When it came back online, the text file had been altered. Below her question, in a different, blocky font, was a new line, "Brennan. Signal 2 to stop." The reveal was a collaboration with a ghost. Aris, the rational engineer, began leaving notes in the text file. She asked about the old junction diagrams. The system would respond, not with words, but by altering her diagnostic maps, superimposing faded lines of the old, demolished junction over her modern schematics. She asked, "What do you want?" The response, after the next reboot, was chillingly clear: "Correct the log." The accident report had blamed Walter Brennan. His ghost, or the residual psychic imprint trapped in the silicon and steel that now occupied his workspace, was demanding exoneration. The reboots weren't malfunctions. They were attempts to regain control, to reset the system to a state that reflected the truth of that night in 1995. Aris took a professional risk. She compiled a dossier, her anomalous logs, the altered files, the historical research, and a bold technical theory suggesting a persistent environmental data corruption event linked to prior infrastructure. She presented it not as a haunting, but as a heretofore undocumented form of system error caused by quantum data retention in the local geomagnetic field. Her company, eager to solve the costly outage and intrigued by the pseudo-scientific jargon, approved a full firmware rewrite for the Seek cabinets. The aftermath is recorded in the system update ticket. During the rewrite, the technician on site reported a bizarre event. As he uploaded the new, cleansed firmware to Seek 8 at 10 o'clock a.m., the cabinet status lights, of their own accord, cycled in a rapid, celebratory pattern, a pattern that matched no diagnostic code in any manual. The reboot stopped. The signals have functioned perfectly ever since. But the verification, and the chilling unresolved detail, lies in the corporate archives. Aris Thorne's dossier was filed under Case Study 847, Anomalous Subsystem Behavior. A footnote was added after the successful fix. The senior vice president of technology, a notoriously hard-nosed man, appended a handwritten note to the physical file copy, a note that has since become legend within the department. It reads, "Following the update, I received a single, internal company email. Sender ID, Webinar 995. Subject, thank you." Message body was blank. IT security found no origin point for the message. It was logged as a system glitch. Do not pursue further. The signal cabinet is quiet now. But those who know the story wonder if Walter Brennan is finally at rest, or if he simply has his signal set to clear, watching over a junction that no longer exists from a tower that is now just lines of perfect uncorrupted code. The Moab surveyor's last transit. Ben Grizz Jarrety was a 58-year-old senior surveyor for a contractor specializing in rail expansion projects. His face was a roadmap of desert sun and wind, his hands permanently stained with dirt and graphite. He lived for the solitude of the pre-construction phase, the silent, empty landscapes before the machines arrived. His current project was a proposed spur line off a main artery near Moab, Utah, meant to service a new mineral extraction site. The initial reconnaissance had flagged a 5-mile section through a canyon so narrow and winding it was known on the old surveyor's maps as the Thread. Ben's job was to walk it, plot it, and stake it. According to the geotechnical preliminary report, the canyon walls were stable Navajo sandstone. It was just tight, dark, and acoustically strange. He packed for a 3-day solo hike, carrying his vintage but reliable optical transit, a tripod, and a leather-bound field book. He preferred the old tools. They didn't need batteries, and they never lied. The inciting incident was a discrepancy in his own field notes. On the afternoon of the first day, deep in the narrowest part of the Thread, where the sky was reduced to a jagged blue ribbon overhead, Ben set up his transit to take a bearing. He carefully sighted a distinctive rock pinnacle he'd marked on his map as Station Alpha. He read the angle, recorded it in his book, 47 degrees, 22 minutes. He packed up, hiked another 500 yards through the sandy wash, and set up again. This time, needing a back sight to ensure his line was true, he aimed his transit back the way he came, toward Station Alpha. The reading was impossible. The angle indicated the pinnacle should have been visible, but through the eyepiece, he saw only unbroken canyon wall. He checked his math. He ray-leveled the instrument. He got the same result. It was as if the landscape behind him had subtly rearranged itself. He wrote it off as eye strain and the disorienting effect of the winding canyon. He marked the page with the question mark, a habit for anomalies to review later. The buildup was a war against disorientation. The second day, his trusted brass compass began to swim. The needle would quiver, then slowly spin a full 360 degrees before settling, not on magnetic north, but pointing insistently down canyon, deeper into the thread. The temperature, which should have been climbing with the sun, dropped sharply. In specific, shadowy stretches of the wash, his shadow, cast by the high midday sun, would sometimes stretch out before him, and then, for a few heartbeats, cast a second, fainter shadow in a completely different direction, as if lit by another, unseen light source. He began to hear the echoes of his own movements return to him. Altered, the crunch of his boots on gravel would come back as the sound of multiple footsteps, slightly out of sync. Once, it returned as the clear, metallic ring of a hammer striking a survey spike. That night, camping in a slightly wider section, he built a small fire. In the flickering light, he reviewed his field book. The notes from the first day, the ones with the question mark, were different. The numbers were the same, but next to them, in a handwriting that was almost his, but not quite, a little neater, a little more rigid, was a notation. Check foresight against benchmark. Error likely in initial setup. Ben felt a deep, primal chill. He was alone. He had not written that. He closed the book and tied it shut with a leather thong. Later, as he tried to sleep, he heard it, a slow, grinding scrape, like stone on stone, coming from the canyon wall mere feet from his tent. It lasted for hours, stopping only at dawn. The reveal came on the third and final day. Ben was determined to close his survey loop, to get a fix on his final stake from a known point. He climbed a treacherous, crumbly slope to a ledge that should have given him a clear view back up the thread. Panting, he set up his transit. As he bent to peer through the eyepiece, he froze. Engraved into the sandstone of the ledge, right where the tripod legs stood, were 3 perfectly drilled, quarter-inch holes, forming a triangle. They were clean, recent, and identical to the holes his own tripod would make. Someone had set up an instrument on this exact spot, recently, but he was the first person assigned to this canyon in 30 years, according to the project archives. His hands trembling slightly, he looked through the transit. He sighted back toward his starting point. The optics were crystal clear, and there, magnified in the circular field of view, he saw something that stopped his heart. Down in the wash, halfway between his position and his first camp, was another surveyor. A man in khaki pants and a wide-brimmed hat, bent over an antique wooden tripod, peering through an old-fashioned theodolite. The figure was translucent, shimmering in the heat haze, but unmistakably real. As Ben watched, the figure straightened up, turned, and looked directly up the canyon, directly at Ben's vantage point. It raised an arm and pointed, not at Ben, but past him, down the canyon, toward the proposed endpoint of the rail spur. Then it pointed to the ground at its own feet. It repeated this gesture 3 times. A message. The line goes there, but here is where I am. Ben understood. He wasn't conducting the first survey of the thread. He was following in the footsteps of a survey that had never been completed. This was a ghost in the data, a spirit of a predecessor trying to correct his own unfinished work, or warning him away from a fatal error. The shifting bearings, the altered notes, the phantom footprints, it was all an attempt to communicate, to get Ben to see what he could not see on his own. The aftermath is documented in the project's survey archive. Ben Garrity completed his assignment, but his final recommended path for the spur line deviated significantly from the original proposal. His notes cite unstable substrate and hydrological risks not present in the initial geological survey as reasons for the costly reroute. The project engineers, relying on his impeccable reputation, approved the change. The verification lies in the historical record. After filing his report, Ben became obsessed. He spent months in the County Historical Society. He found it. A brief mention in a 1923 railroad company newsletter. A surveyor named Samuel P. Ellis was reported missing while scouting a potential route through the canyons west of Moab. His body and equipment were never recovered. The proposed line was abandoned. A photograph of Ellis showed a man in khaki and a wide-brimmed hat, standing beside a wooden theodolite. The chilling, unresolved detail is not about the past, but the future. The rail spur was built along Ben's revised route. It has operated without incident for a decade, but the crew that installed the tracks reported oddities. Their laser levels would sometimes pick up a second, phantom point of light, dancing beside their own. Their GPS units would show a stationary ghost rover point for several minutes at one specific coordinate in the thread, a point that corresponds to where Ben saw the figure. The data point is always labeled unknown. It appears randomly in the project's digital as built files, and no amount of file cleansing can delete it permanently. It simply reappears, as if Samuel P. Ellis is still there, forever, taking his bearing, ensuring that this time, the line is laid exactly right. The dispatcher's last train. Henry Cho worked in the air-conditioned, windowless silence of the centralized traffic control center for a major transcontinental railroad. His world was a vast, illuminated electronic map, a symphony of blinking lights representing trains, switches, and signals across a 500-mile territory. His voice, calm and measured, was law on the rails, coordinating the ballet of freight and passenger traffic. He was 49, a master of efficiency, known for moving the most ton-miles with the fewest delays. His shift was the twilight 1 p.m. to midnight. The incident began on a night of severe thunderstorms, with lightning strikes causing minor havoc on the systems. The logs show multiple false occupancy alert sections of track showing a train present when none was there. The inciting incident was train 666, the M66, a manifest freight running eastbound on the Redwood subdivision. On his board, its identifying tag, M66, pulls steadily as it approached the junction at Shelby. Henry needed to route it onto the single-track Mountain Pass line, holding a westbound coal train at the next siding. He radioed the M66's engineer, a man named Jeffers with whom he'd spoken 100 times. M66, CTC, you are clear into the mountain line at Shelby. Signals will sequence for you. The reply was immediate, but wrong. It wasn't Jeffers's familiar, gravelly voice. It was a younger, tighter voice, strain. Copy, CTC. Clear into the mountain line. Henry frowned. M66, confirm your engineer identity. A pause. Then, Engineer Daniels, CTC. Henry pulled up the crew sheet. The scheduled engineer for M66 was indeed Frank Jeffers. The listed relief engineer was a Carl Montoya. There was no Daniels in the active crew database for that train. A personnel error, he assumed. He made a note to file a discrepancy report later. The buildup was a slow uncoupling from reality. The M66's progress on the map began to subtly deviate from its predicted running time. It was running 5 minutes hot, then 10, eating into the window for the opposing coal train. Henry radioed again. M66, CTC. You are exceeding authorized track speed. Confirm your instrumentation. The voice, Daniels, came back, laced with static. Instruments, unreliable. CTC. Visual navigation only. Mountains are close. That was an impossibility. You cannot run a 1,000-ton train by sight in a pitch-black mountain tunnel. Furthermore, the defect detectors the M66 passed began reporting anomalous data. The first reported dragging equipment. The second reported excessive heat signature, rear third of train, The third reported nothing. It went dead as the train passed, then came back online. Henry initiated a protocol for a possible runaway or hazardous condition. He tried to contact the lead unit directly on the emergency channel. Silence. Then, the signals themselves began to behave irrationally. A block signal 20 miles ahead of the M66 suddenly displayed a solid red, then a flashing red a stop and proceed indication that hadn't been used in that territory for years. Henry hadn't commanded it. The system showed no fault. It was as if the track itself was reacting to the train. He pulled the audio feed from the last defect detector. Over the rumble of the train, he heard it. Not just the sound of wheels, but a high, metallic shrieking like steel being tortured, and underneath, a low, rhythmic moaning, almost organic. He felt a cold sweat break out on his back. This was no ordinary malfunction. The reveal came when Henry, desperate for a visual, activated a remote-controlled security camera at the entrance to the longest tunnel on the pass, the 2.1-mile Black Bear Tunnel. The camera feed was grainy, infrared. He watched the screen. The M66 should have been a string of well-lit, rectangular containers. What emerged from the tunnel's mouth was something else. The lead locomotives were wrong, an older, grimmer model not in the company's active fleet, their paint blistered and blackened. The cars behind were not modern containers, but a jagged silhouette of boxcars, tankers, and flat cars loaded with shapes shrouded in tarps, all leaning at slight, unnatural angles. And at the very rear, there was no flashing red end of train device. Instead, there was a single, flickering orange light, like a lantern. The train was a ghost, a train from another time, perhaps from a wreck that never stopped wrecking. Daniels wasn't a relief engineer. He was the original crew, forever trying to complete a run that ended in catastrophe. Henry's professional demeanor shattered. He screamed into the mic, "Who are you? Identify your train." The radio crackled to life one final time. The voice was broken, distant, drowning in static, and what sounded like howling wind. "CTC, this is train, the Continental. We are off the rails. In the dark, can you see us?" And then it was gone. On the map, the blinking tag for M66 vanished from the mountain line. It simply ceased to exist. The signals returned to normal. The defect detectors reported clear track. The aftermath is a labyrinth of bureaucracy and silence. Henry filed a catastrophic emergency report. A search crew was sent down the mountain line. They found nothing. No train, no debris, no signs of derailment. The real M66, with engineer Jeffers at the controls, was found held at a red signal on a parallel main line 30 miles south, exactly where it should have been according to the corrected system logs. The investigation concluded that Henry Cho had suffered a complex temporal disorientation event, likely brought on by stress and the stormy's effect on the control systems. He was offered a medical pension. The verification is buried in the deepest archives. A retired CTC manager, after hearing the story, did some digging. He found a forgotten incident report from November 1958. A passenger train named the Continental, running that very route during a blizzard, had vanished. Not derailed, vanished. No wreckage was ever found. The official cause was listed as a catastrophic avalanche with no recovery possible, though no avalanche scar matching the description was ever located. The manifest included an engineer named Robert Daniels. Henry Cho never worked aboard again. But the chilling, unresolved detail is this: on the anniversary of that stormy night, the CTC system logs for the Redwood subdivision still experience a brief, unexplained anomaly. For exactly 60 seconds, at the precise time Henry first spoke to Daniels, a phantom train tag appears on the master map, on the old mountain line. The water tower's thirst. Maya Santos was a 32-year-old environmental compliance officer for a short-line railroad that operated along the drought-stricken plains of West Texas. Her job was part chemist, part detective, ensuring the railway's operations didn't contaminate the fragile ecosystem. She was pragmatic, data-driven, and intimately familiar with the arid landscape's subtle signs of distress. Her current focus was a series of inexplicably low water levels in the company's historic, standalone water tower, a rusting, 5,000-gallon behemoth that stood sentinel beside a seldom-used spur line near the ghost town of Perdido. The tower serviced the steam-powered excursion train that ran tourists on weekends, but its evaporation and usage rates, according to Maya's spreadsheets, didn't match the drastic drops in volume. She suspected a major leak. A site visit was mandatory. The inciting incident was the condition of the ground. Maya arrived on a Tuesday, the air already shimmering with heat. She expected to find a swampy, eroded area around the tower's concrete foundation if a leak was present. Instead, the earth was parched, baked into cracked tiles, bleached white as bone. It was drier here than anywhere else in the surrounding desert. The tower's massive iron legs showed no signs of seepage or rust streaks. She took an initial water sample from the drain valve. The lab report that came back was normal, a bit high in soluble iron. But the volume gauge on the tower, a simple floating dial behind a glass porthole, showed it was only 30% full. According to the pumphouse log, it had been topped off to 95% just 4 days prior. 65,000 gallons of water don't just vanish into dry Texas air. Maya's scientific mind itched with the wrongness of it. The buildup was a collection of sensory and data anomalies. Maya set up trail cameras and moisture sensors around the tower's base, returning each day to download the data. The cameras showed nothing but the shifting shadows of the day. The moisture sensors registered nothing above ambient desert dryness. Yet, every morning, the water level had dropped another 5-10. It was being consumed, but not by any visible means. Then came the sounds. On her third visit, as she stood beneath the massive, riveted tank, she heard it, a deep, resonant drip. Not the rapid patter of a leak, but a slow, heavy plink, followed by a long pause, then another plink. It sounded like it was coming from inside the tank, but the rhythm was odd, almost deliberate. She used a stethoscope from her diagnostic kit against the hot iron. The drip was there, but beneath it, she heard a faint, wet, sucking sound, like something drinking from a giant straw. The local history provided a grim context. Perdido, she learned from microfiche newspapers at the county library, wasn't always a ghost town. In 1934, during the Dust Bowl's worst year, a railroad work crew of 10 men, desperate for water, had attempted an emergency tapping of this very tower. The company, citing strict rationing, had padlocked the valve. The men, in a feverish state, reportedly tried to scale the tower. The official report stated that the scaffolding collapsed, killing all 10. They were buried in a mass grave not half a mile from the site. The tower, however, showed no structural damage from such an event. The story felt like a folktale, but it stuck in Maya's mind. The investigation turned forensic. Maya obtained permission to drain the remaining water from the tower for an internal inspection. As the last of it gushed from the outflow pipe, she climbed the maintenance ladder to the access hatch on top. The interior of the tank was dark, echoing, and smelled of old iron and something else, a faint, coppery scent, like blood. Her headlamp beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the curved walls. And there, she saw them. Handprints, dozens of them, pressed into the rust and mineral scale on the interior of the tank, from the water line all the way up to the very top, near the hatch. They were not modern glove prints. They were the clear, desperate impressions of bare hands, fingers splayed, as if men had been treading water, pressing against the walls, climbing in a frantic, hopeless attempt to reach the top. The highest prints were just inches below the closed hatch. These were not from 1934. Bare skin doesn't imprint on iron, but in the paranoid logic of a haunting, they were a perfect record of final, agonizing moments. The reveal was not visual, but tactile. As Maya shone her light on the highest handprint, a sudden, violent tremor ran through the tower. A deep, groaning boom echoed within the empty chamber, as if the entire structure were a giant bell being struck. She scrambled back, falling onto the iron walkway. From the now open drain pipe far below, a geyser of rust-colored water erupted, spraying across the parched earth with a hiss. The tower was empty. She had watched it drain. This was impossible. The water splashed onto the bleached soil, and where it landed, the ground didn't absorb it. Instead, The water beaded and rolled, as if on a hot griddle, and then vanished. Not soaking in, but disappearing. It was as if the ground itself was drinking it with an unquenchable thirst. The tower wasn't leaking, it was being drained. The 1934 crew never left. Their final, desperate craving for water had become a permanent, psychic stain on the location, an eternal vacuum pulling liquid into whatever void they now inhabited. The aftermath is recorded in an environmental hazard report. Maya Santos officially condemned the Perdido water tower, citing structural instability and irreversible biological contamination of unknown origin. The company, facing potential liability, sealed the valve and fenced off the area. The weekend excursion train now trucks in its own water. The verification comes from the continued monitoring. The fence is maintained, but every Monday morning, the lock on the gate is found wet, as if dipped in water, and the parched earth directly beneath the tower is damp to the touch, though no moisture registers on sensors. Most chillingly, satellite thermal imaging of the area, taken for an unrelated agricultural survey, shows a persistent, kidney-shaped cold spot in the exact footprint of the tower's shadow at high noon, a spot dozens of degrees cooler than the surrounding desert, with no geological explanation. The report's annotator simply noted, "Anomalous thermal sink. Recommend no further study." Maya left the railroad industry a year later, taking a job with the Coastal Environmental Agency. She never speaks of Perdido, but those who maintain the fence say that on still, moonless nights, if you place your ear to one of the tower's rusted legs, you can still hear it. Not a drip, but the slow, collective, gasping breath of 10 thirsty men, and the deep, hollow sound of something drinking in the dark. The Hobo Codex. Jasper "Jazz" Mullins was a 66-year-old retired rail police officer turned amateur historian, spending his golden years documenting the vanishing culture of the American hobo. He wasn't interested in modern homelessness, but in the kings of the rails from the 1920s to the 1950s, the migratory workers who followed the harvests, communicating through a cryptic symbology chalked on fence posts and water tanks known as the Hobo Code. Jazz had the largest private collection of code photographs in the country. His white whale was the rumored Codex, a master document said to contain not just warnings about vicious dogs or generous housewives, but deeper, older symbols pertaining to things best avoided on the rails, things that weren't human. His breakthrough came when he purchased a moldy steamer trunk from an estate sale in Omaha, formerly owned by a man named Ramblin' Pete. Inside, beneath the layer of moth-eaten wool, was a leather-bound ledger. It wasn't the codex. It was Ramblin' Pete's personal journal, filled with dates, routes, and hand-drawn symbols. And on the inside back cover, scrawled in frantic pencil, was a sentence: "The real codex ain't on paper. It is on the stones at the base of the old trestle at milepost 319, the decommissioned Lakeland branch. Don't go at night." The inciting incident was the first symbol. Driven by a historian's obsession, Jazz located the overgrown branch line. The trestle was a decaying timber monster spanning a deep, wooded ravine. He spent an afternoon carefully clearing brush from the massive granite blocks at its eastern footing. And there, carved into the stone, not chalked, were symbols. They were similar to the classic Hobo Code, but distorted, more angular, somehow older. The first one he cleaned off was familiar, a circle with a diagonal line through it, the classic symbol for bad water, but beneath it was a smaller, added detail, a series of wavy lines inside the circle, and above it, a tiny, stick-figure depiction of a person not drinking, but being pulled, head first, into the circle. This wasn't a warning about sickness. It was a warning about something that lived in the water, something that took people. The buildup was a descent into a hidden language of terror. Over weeks of visits, Jazz uncovered over 24 of these permanent carvings. They were a lexicon of the anomalous. One showed the classic cat symbol for "a kind lady lives here," but the cat had too many legs, and its smile was a row of sharp triangles. The annotation, scratched in tiny letters, read, "She feeds you till you can't leave. Then she feeds on you." Another showed the standard "dangerous town" symbol of 2 crossed knives, but the knives were dripping, and the town was represented not by a simple square, but by a spiral, as if the town itself were a maze you entered, but never left. This was a map, but not of geography. It was a map of metaphysical dangers, catalogued by generations of men who lived outside society and saw what society refused to acknowledge. Jazz began cross-referencing the symbols with locations from Ramblin' Pete's journal. An entry dated August 1937 read, "Camped at the Quiet Gorge. Heard the singing wires again. Saw the light walker on the trestle. Used the hold still symbol on a scrap of burlap. It passed over me. Joe didn't know the symbol. Joe followed the light. Joe is gone." The hold still symbol was one of the carvings, a simple straight line with an arrow pointing down at it. Jazz had thought it meant stop here. It meant become inert, pretend to be stone. The horror of it dawned on him. These men weren't just avoiding sheriffs and rail bulls. They were navigating a landscape populated by entities, and their survival depended on knowing the right sigil to ward them off. The reveal came the night he broke his own rule. A graduate student wanted footage for a documentary. Ego and a desire to share his discovery overrode caution. They went at dusk. As the last light faded, Jazz was explaining a symbol that looked like a zigzag between two lines. Angry river spirit, he translated when the student's high-powered camera light, panning across the trestle above, caught a figure. It stood midway across, silhouetted against the twilight sky. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to be made of the same weathered wood as the trestle. It didn't move. Then, the student's portable recorder, slung over his shoulder, picked up a sound, a faint, metallic hum, like a telephone wire vibrating in the wind. The singing wires. The figure on the trestle turned its head. Not a smooth motion, but a jerky, sequential realignment, like a stop-motion puppet. It had no visible face, just a darker patch where a face should be. Jazz's mind went blank with panic. All his academic knowledge evaporated. He couldn't remember a single symbol. The student, frozen in terror, kept the light trained on the thing. It began to walk toward them, its steps making no sound on the creaky timbers. Then Jazz's foot scuffed one of the carved stones. He looked down. In the peripheral glow of the camera light, he saw it. A symbol he'd cleaned just that afternoon. 3 vertical lines topped by a horizontal one. The classic safe camp symbol. But beneath it, on this stone, was an addition. A circle enclosing the entire mark. In the context of the codex, he suddenly understood. It didn't mean safe camp. It meant sanctuary, a place things couldn't enter. He grabbed the student and pulled him into the small, triangular space formed by the trestle's massive stone footing and the hillside, the exact spot above the carved symbol. The light walker reached the end of the trestle. It stood at the edge, looking down at them. It raised a long, spindly arm, pointing. The camera light reflected off something smooth and dark, where a hand should be. It took a step off the trestle, onto the air, and stopped. As if it had hit an invisible wall, it tilted its head. The humming grew furious, then faded. It turned and walked back across the trestle, dissolving into the shadows. They didn't move until sunrise. The aftermath is a mix of scholarship and trauma. The student's footage was, of course, a blurry, shaky mess that showed nothing definitive. He dropped out of the documentary program. Jazz Mullins, however, finally published his life-ease work, The Unseen Code, Survival Symbols on the American Rails. It was peer-reviewed and dismissed as fascinating folklore. The verification lies with the few remaining children of the old hobos, now in their 80s and 90s. In private correspondence, after reading Jazz's book, several confirmed their fathers had spoken of the other codes, the ones for the things that ain't men. One letter, from a man in Arizona, stated simply, "My dad said the marks were prayers to the rails themselves, to keep the bad things in their own tracks. You found the prayer book. Don't go back to the church." Jazz never returned to the Lakeland branch. The chilling, unresolved detail is that his book, while an academic curio, has found an underground audience. Modern train hoppers, a new generation of itinerant youth, have photocopied the symbols from his book. There are reports, fragmented and unverified, of these symbols, the circle with line for the water thing, the straight line with the arrow for the light walker found freshly chalked on boxcars and under bridges across the country. It seems the codex, once rediscovered, is back in circulation. A new generation is learning the old rules, because the things those rules were written for, they never left the tracks. The Ballast Man. This story is different. It doesn't come from a single worker, but from a pattern. A whisper that surfaces in union halls, in break rooms, at remote maintenance sheds, in the quiet confessionals of therapists employed by railroad employee assistance programs. It is the story of the Ballast Man, and it is the reason why, if you ask any veteran track worker if they've ever been truly alone on the line, they will pause, look away, and change the subject. The inciting incident is always the same, though the locations change. A stretch of isolated track, usually after sunset or before dawn, when a single worker is performing a final walk or a last check. The worker, let's call him David, a 40-year-old track inspector with 19 years of clean service, is finishing up. His crew has left. The work train has pulled away. He's alone with his truck, the silent rails, and the crushing quiet of an empty landscape. He's packing his tools when he hears it. The crunch of footsteps on the ballast. The sharp, clean sound of someone walking on the loose rock between the TIs. He turns. No one is there. He calls out. No answer. He assumes it's an echo, a trick of the wind. But the sound continues. Crunch. Step. Crunch. Step. It's pacing him, 20 yards behind, just out of sight around a gentle curve or lost in the gloom. He walks faster. The steps match his pace. He stops. The steps take 2 more strides, then stop. Silence. This is the first encounter. It's logged as auditory fatigue or wildlife. The buildup is a campaign of presence. It never appears on camera. Motion sensors don't trigger, but it makes itself known. David will be in his truck, writing up his report, and a single perfect handprint will appear on the passenger side window, etched in dust or grime, as if someone had leaned close to look in. The truck sensors might trigger, unlocking the doors for no reason. Tools left on the rear bumper are found neatly arranged on the ground in a line, pointing down the track. Then, the radio in his pickup, turned off, will crackle to life for a single second, emitting a sound like someone breathing slowly, deliberately, directly into the microphone. The most common report, across multiple testimonies, is the smell. A distinct, mineral odor, like wet gravel and rust, that fills the cab of the truck suddenly, then vanishes. David, like the others, tries rational explanations. Carbon monoxide poisoning? He gets his truck checked. Faulty radio? It's replaced. He begins to feel a constant, low-grade dread, a sense of being studied by something that understands his routine perfectly. He starts finding things. A single, worn-out work glove, palm up, on the center of a tie. A thermos cup, full of cold, stale coffee, placed on the hood of his truck. These aren't threatening. They are offerings, or perhaps, bait. The reveal is never visual. No one claims to have seen the Ballast Men clearly. The horror is in the understanding of what it is, which comes through deduction and shared lore. David talks to an old-timer at the Union Hall, a man about to retire. Over a beer, the old-timer doesn't laugh. He nods, his face grim. You met him, then. He explains the theory, passed down. The Ballast Man isn't a ghost of a specific person. He is the genius Loki of the railroad itself, an amalgam of every worker who ever died on the line, not in dramatic wrecks, but in the quiet, lonely accidents. The slip from a ballast car, the heart attack between inspections, the misstep in front of a quiet rolling train. He is the collective spirit of the forgotten, the ones whose bodies became part of the roadbed, whose bones now lie under the crushed rock. He doesn't haunt out of malice. He haunts out of loneliness. And he is territorial. He attaches himself to sections of track, and to the workers who maintain them. He is a perverse guardian spirit. The offerings? Their attempts at interaction. The pacing? Footsteps? He's keeping you on schedule, herding you to safety, or perhaps just ensuring you don't leave his domain. The true horror of the reveal is the choice it presents. The old-timer tells David the 2 rules, unspoken but absolute. First, Never acknowledge him directly. Never speak to him. Never write about him in an official report. To do so is to make the relationship permanent. Second, never, ever accept a gift. If you take the glove, drink the coffee, you are accepting his terms. You are agreeing to stay. David remembers the thermos cup on his hood. He left it there. The next day, it was gone. The aftermath for David is a life of managed paranoia. He transferred to a busy urban transit line, where he is never alone. He is functional, but he checks his mirrors constantly. He will never work a remote stretch solo again. His story, and dozens like it, form a body of evidence that exists only in the oral tradition of rail workers. The verification, however, comes from an unexpected and chillingly official source: the raw data from automated track inspection cars. These high-tech vehicles, equipped with LiDAR, ground-penetrating radar, and thermal cameras, run the lines to check for defects. In their petabytes of data, analysts have noted recurring, unclassifiable anomalies. On isolated stretches with a history of worker reports, the LiDAR sometimes picks up a walking void, a human-shaped space where the laser light is not reflected, moving slowly along the track. The thermal cameras sometimes record a long, thin, humanoid cold spot meandering through the ballast, its temperature identical to the surrounding crushed stone. These anomalies are always flagged by the software, reviewed by a human, and dismissed as sensor ghosting or vegetation interference. But the files are kept, the coordinates are mapped, and the pattern matches the stories perfectly. The ballast man is the final story, because he is not a single event, but a condition of the job. He is the price of solitude on the iron road. He is the reason the most experienced workers always seem to have a partner in the most remote places. Even if none is officially assigned, they will never admit it's for protection. They'll say it's for safety protocol, but in their eyes, you'll see the truth. They know that the line is never empty. Someone is always walking the ballast, keeping watch over his kingdom of stone and steel. And if you work the rails long enough, in the right places, he will eventually decide to walk beside you. The only question is whether he sees you as a colleague or as future ballast. 11 stories. 11 fractures in the reality we take for granted. From the collected forests of the Pacific Northwest to the digital ghosts in signaling cabinets, from the parched deserts of Texas to the haunted switchyards of the Midwest, a single, unsettling truth emerges. The railroads are more than steel and logistics. They are conduits. They cut through time, through memory, through layers of reality that were never meant to be disturbed. We have walked with a foreman who discovered his work zone was another entity's hunting ground. We rode with an engineer who learned her train carried an unmanifested passenger from another century. We listened to a dispatcher converse with a train that vanished 60 years before he was born. In each case, the horror was not a monster in the classic sense. It was the erosion of certainty. It was the understanding that the rules of physics and procedure are a thin veneer over something older, wilder, and deeply entrenched in these corridors of travel. These accounts are not connected by a single entity, but by a common theme: resonance, trauma, desperation, obsession. Duty. These powerful human emotions seem to imprint upon the iron and the land, echoing back when the conditions are right. The ballast man is the echo of every lonely death. The light walker is the echo of a fear so potent it became a landmark. The phantom crews in Kansas City are the echo of relentless, unending industry. The rails don't just carry freight, they carry echoes. And sometimes, those echoes gain a terrible kind of substance. This is the core of Verified Nightmare's mission. We do not traffic in fiction, we document the echo. Every story you heard tonight is supported by a paper trail, a police report, and fraud investigation, a union log, a declassified file, or the unwavering testimony of multiple, credible witnesses. The proof is in the altered manifests, the sensor data, the thermal images, and the official reports that strain to explain the impossible with technical jargon, because the alternative is unthinkable. So, what do we do with this knowledge? The first call to action is personal. Trust your instincts. If you work in these fields, or if you ever find yourself near the lonely stretches of track after dark, and something feels profoundly wrong. It probably is. The rational mind is a tool, but our older, deeper senses are often the first to detect a resonance that doesn't belong. Listen to them. The second is for this community. Subscribe to Verified Nightmare. Hit that notification bell. In a world where these stories are verified, staying informed is not a passive hobby. It is an act of awareness. We are your research team, sifting through the noise to find the signals in the static. By subscribing, you ensure these investigations continue, and you arm yourself with the only weapon effective against the unknown: knowledge. Help others find that knowledge. Like this video. Algorithmically, it tells the platform that this content matters, that there is an audience for documented truth over sensationalism. It helps other truth seekers find our channel and builds a community grounded in evidence. And finally, we turn to you. Comment below. Have you worked on the rails? Have you lived in a town with a story like these? Share your account. Every comment is read. Every story is investigated. You are our most vital source. The echo is everywhere. Your testimony might be the key to understanding the next pattern. The rails will keep running. The trains will keep moving. But now, when you hear that lonesome whistle in the dead of night, you will know. It might be announcing a shipment of grain or coal, or it might be sounding a departure for a place not on any map, carrying passengers not on any manifest, crewed by souls not on any payroll. You are no longer in the dark. This has been verified. Nightmare. Remember, the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who look just like us, or the ones you can't see at all, walking patiently beside you on the ballast. Stay safe.